In the latest diplomatic push to stop the war in Syria, there's talk of new sanctions, but no breakthrough. As Aleppo is bombed again, there's frustration tonight after an international summit in London.
It could stop tomorrow morning, tonight, if Russia and the Assad regime were to behave according to any norm or any standard of decency. But they've chosen not to.
As tensions rise at the jungle camp in Calais, we hear from the children stranded there and hoping to come to Britain. 40% of people are living in substandard homes, according to the charity Shelter. We have a special report. And Andy Murray takes another step to becoming world #1 with victory in Shanghai. Good evening. A second round of international talks on Syria has ended, with no clear plan of how to stop the bombing by Russian and Syrian government forces of the northern city of Aleppo. Tougher sanctions on Moscow and Damascus were discussed, and no option is said to be off the table. But the Foreign Secretary, Boris Johnson, and his American counterpart, John Kerry, conceded that a military solution was extremely difficult. Our diplomatic correspondent, Caroline Hawley, has more.
The east of Aleppo is being pummeled into submission. That, at least, is the aim of this ferocious firepower. The airstrikes by both the regime and the Russians are relentless. And underneath the bombardment are terrified civilians, as well as the opposition fighters that the Syrian government is so determined to defeat. Hundreds upon hundreds of people have died in Aleppo since a ceasefire collapsed last month. Many of them children, buried under rubble. And both Russia and the regime are being accused of crimes against humanity here. Far away from the Syrian battlefields, in London, yet more talks on how to end the carnage.
It's a humanitarian disaster that is the largest humanitarian disaster since World War II. And it could stop tomorrow morning, tonight, if Russia and the Assad regime were to behave according to any norm or any standard of decency.
So what could the officials sitting around this table actually do to put pressure on the regime and their Russian backers?
There are a lot of measures that we're proposing to do with extra sanctions on the Syrian regime and their supporters, measures to bring those responsible for war crimes before the International Criminal Court. These things will eventually come to bite the perpetrators of these crimes.
No mention of trying to stop the bombing with what Boris Johnson last week described as kinetic military options. They've been called for a no-fly zone, or at least a no-bombing zone.
I haven't seen a big appetite in Europe for people to go to war. I don't see the parliaments of European countries ready to declare war. I don't see a lot of countries deciding that that's the better solution here. So we are pursuing diplomacy because those are the tools that we have.
Takbir! Allah!
On one important front in Syria's war, Islamic State militants have now suffered another defeat. This is the town of Darbik, and today rebels backed by Turkey brought down the IS flag. Strategically, Darbik is of little significance, but it's where IS had promised to fight a final apocalyptic battle with the West. So it is an important symbolic blow. But this is just one front in Syria's war. The country's wider conflict is no closer to an end after all the talking in London today.
And Caroline is with me now. On the face of it, Caroline, it doesn't seem these talks have achieved much.
I'm afraid you're right. There were a lot of strong words, there was a lot of condemnation, and Boris Johnson appealed to Russia and Iran, the backers of the regime, to show mercy to the people of Aleppo. There was talk afterwards of new economic sanctions, but I've been told that there weren't actually even any concrete new proposals on the table to put pressure on Russia, on Syria. And there is a feeling now that not much is going to change on that front until there is a new administration in the United States. So no end, I think, to the bombing of Aleppo and with it the desperate, desperate plight of the civilians who are trapped there.
OK, Caroline, many thanks. Caroline Hawley there. Now, campaigners are calling on the government to speed up as a matter of urgency its programme to resettle hundreds of unaccompanied children stranded in Calais at the camp known as the Jungle. Small groups have been allowed into the UK, but with the camp due to be demolished in the coming days, there's growing concern for those still living there. Our special correspondent Ed Thomas has spent the last week at the camp where tensions are rising.
Life in Calais, the rush to escape, the panic and the tear gas.
Tear gas! Tear gas! Tear gas! Let's move! How old are you, Mohammed? 16. Yeah.
16 years old, and like many here, a teenager alone looking for a way out.
Tear gas is being fired all around. Some of the children trying to get on those trucks. Another one. Were as young as 14 or 15.
And these are the images that make many in Britain nervous. Mohammed says he has no family in the UK, but refuses to stay in France.
But police? Police. Gas. But you should be in a school. School for UK. School in the UK? Yeah.
But hundreds of teenagers here say they do have relatives in the UK and are now stranded in Calais.
If I find another
Like brothers Jamshed and Jamal. They're 14 and 16 and say they left Afghanistan 6 months ago. Jamshed says he's sad and wants to be with his father and cousin in England. Jamal tells us he's desperate. We've given our names in. We don't know what to do, he says. We are children. If their family links are proven, the British government has promised to reunite teenagers in days. Charities here say some unaccompanied children have been sexually abused, others beaten. All are vulnerable to people traffickers.
One girl who didn't want to go on camera broke down as she told us how her friends were raped and stabbed. The charity Safe Passage UK